I am honored and, before being honored, privileged to be here because I do adore the University of Chicago. It was a wonderful experience for me from 1976 to 1982, getting my degrees down in Hyde Park. And it was one of the great experiences of my life. And I'm honored to be able to teach here as well, some weekday nights throughout the year. And I'm honored to be here to speak shortly to you as well. I know a lot more about wine than beer, and there are people, statistically speaking, in this room who know more about beer than I do, and I defer to you if there are anything you would like to add in conversation with me later on. That'd be great. But I did want to talk a little bit about beer because that's our topic tonight, and it is Oktoberfest. We styled the tasting after German beers because of that. We have German beers, and 3 of them, and we have one American-style German beer as well. And we don't have an Oktoberfest because we couldn't find any. All of Chicago has consumed them up already. Apparently in Chicago, Oktoberfest happens in September, so they're gone. There's some lingering on the shelves in retail stores, but there's nothing at the wholesale level. So we punted and put together the best kind of list we can. I'll explain to you what the beers are and where they're located so you can avail yourself of them as well. But when I started learning about beer, much in the wake of my son, who's 29 years old, went to Boston College, and got the same degrees in college that his father got in college, religious studies and philosophy, i.e. no job after school. But he loves beer, and he's very much taken our Belgian heritage up and learned a great deal about Belgian beers. He's traveled to some of the breweries in Belgium as well when he was away for his junior year at Oxford, a great beer town, by the way. We routinely spend 7 or 8 hours a day in Oxford simply walking and pub crawling, and we'd have a pint at about every place every hour. So it was a good day, good father-son day, a good way to spend time together in a great place for beer, England. But his nickname his name is Colin. His last name, of course, is St. John, but his nickname is St. Beer. And he knows a lot about beer, and I've learned a lot from him. In fact, I learned something on the way over. I called him and I said, "Hey, what do you think is the percentage of beer that is consumed in our country that is controlled by the big 3, Miller, Coors, and Anheuser-Busch?" And he has Siri now, so he talked to her and found out that 80% of beer consumed in this country is from those people. The other 20% are beers like the ones that we have here. And beer and wine actually, as I found out by talking with Colin, are very much alike, and so I was very happy to know that, so I didn't have to really learn too much more. But with wine, of course, you have the basic substance of grapes and their transformation during the process of fermentation into the liquid that we call wine. And with beer, there's very much the same kind of thing, except that use grains, mostly barley, but a lot of wheat. We have wheat beers here tonight, for example. But the grain provides what the grapes provide for the process of fermentation, and that is some sort of sweetness, much of which in many beers stays behind in some residual percentage. So a lot of ales, for example, are somewhat sweet. Instead of acidity, the fruity acidity that fruit has, that grapes have, that they lend to a well-framed wine, beer uses, in beer making, they use hops to kind of give it that kind of definition, the closure to the taste, and some sort of dryness that snaps the taste to the finish. Beer without hops is pretty dull. It's worse than the beer in the next morning that has no carbonation that you found in the kitchen while you're doing the dishes. You don't want beer without hops. And it's the yeast that gives both wine and beer their fruitiness, except in the case of beer, that's about all that you get fruitiness from are the different yeasts. In the case of grapes, of course, you have lots of different fruit flavors that come from the grapes. They're very similar, and they follow the same pattern with fermentation. Sugar, in the presence of yeast, is converted into carbon dioxide and alcohol. In some wines, that stays behind in carbon dioxide. In the case of champagne, in beer, it stays a lot behind in the case of carbonation. Beer, however, is much more the grandfather of wine. Beer has been around for about 10,000 years. It was probably invented by mistake because there's no reason that it would have been made on purpose. But some Egyptian or Sumerian baker probably found a mess of dough that had been wet by the rain or by his wife or slave misstep by adding too much water to the batch, and that mass stayed around for a couple days and started to ferment with wild yeast that are actually present in this room, attacking, not those, of course, 10,000 years ago, but the wild yeast just attacking the starches and sugars in the grain, and this thing started to bubble up. We do that anyway when we make bread and we let it rise, we let it bubble up. And he said, well, hell with it, if I can't bake it because it's too sloppy, this porridge that I now have, at least I'll eat it because I don't want to waste it. And something happened after he ate it. he most probably he thought, well, what is that about? And so he said, well, it was wet bread, so I'm going to do it again. And so he did it up. And pretty soon after many, many thousands of years, people figured out that if you wet grains, and furthermore, if you boil them and you do something with them, they turn into this really nice burpy liquid that gets you buzzed. And they call that beer, cerveza, cereals, cerveza, pivo, all sorts of different names. We just call it beer or ale. And that's the history of beer. There are two major types of beer: ales, which are the original beer. We make them even to this day. They're warm, they're fermented in the room, probably about room temperature, aged at room temperature. They're fragile, they don't last a long time. They're the kind of beers you get in England where they pull them up from the basement because they're not refrigerated except down there. And those are very, very traditional, mostly brown beers. Lagers, which we're more familiar with because that's the kind of beer we generally consume, or when we go traveling, have at a bar, because almost every single country, even lots of Muslim countries, make lagers for the tourist trade or for in their hotels and hospitable establishments. Are date from the 1400s, so they're a relatively new invention. They're made under cold conditions, which has to do with the verb lagering, the German beer word to keep things in the cave, to cool them down. It's a slower fermentation because it's cooler. They're fresher, they're crisper, and they're a new style of beer. But almost all beers fall within those two families. We have both of those here tonight. The beers that we do have, the Hello beer was a German Pils or Pilsner style beer. That is to say, a light, fresh lager that is highly hopped and is the style of beer that was named after the area was Germany, is now the Czech Republic, from around the town of Pils. Very old style of lager beer. It's fresh, it's crisp, it's highly hopped, and it's a good starter beer because it doesn't take too much of your energy to enjoy it. It comes in at around 5% alcohol by volume. I'll tell you the alcohol so you know what tables to be careful about. But that's our Hello beer. The beer that the business and professional programs is sporting is an American beer called Lagunitas Doppelweizen. And it is a beer styled after a Bavarian style beer, so it's kind of in the Oktoberfest family, but made with a lot of wheat and barley. So the Doppelweizen is double the amount of wheat. It's about 35-40% wheat, which is a really high percentage of wheat to be used in the making of a beer. And it's a Doppelbock, so it's not just a plain bock, a heavy beer to start with. It's a Doppelbock. It's a big bock. It's a big goat. And so it's a big, strong, full-flavored, hoppy beer that comes in at 8.5% alcohol by volume. So, as with all things business or professional, my people over there, be careful. My people have, at the Arts and Humanities and Sciences table, a beer from near the town of Köln, or Cologne, as we say in English. And Köln beers are called Kölsch. And it's from a very fine brewery called Züners, S-U-umlaut-O-N-E-R. And Kolsch beers are an old, fairly obscure style, now being made in our country by some of our small beer producers. They're like a mild pils. They're not as highly hopped. They're a little slightly sweet, and they're very, very soft and almost winey in their aromas. They're kind of grapey, winey to some people's minds. This is 4.5% alcohol by volume. And the final beer at the graduate studies table in the corner, in the cave, in the back of the corner, is a Schwarze beer, a black beer, the predecessor to stout and porter that the English made famous. And it is called a black beer because it's black. It's dark, very, very dark brown. Can't see through it in a glass, kind of black. It doesn't mean, because it's black, that it's heavier than other beers. In fact, it's a lot lighter than other beers. Michael Jackson called this the Black Pils, for example, a misnomer in a certain sense, in a hybrid term. But it's black because the malt, the barley, after it's malted and starting to turn some of its starches into sugar, is highly, highly roasted so that it's browned a great deal The effect is the Maillard effect. It's a Frenchman who found out that if you caramelize sugars so much so that they become really dark brown or black, they get a caramely, coffee, toasty, chocolatey kind of character, and they make this kind of beer. Because there's very little sugar left in the barley, it comes in at a very low percentage. So it's actually a fresh dark beer at about 4% alcohol by volume. It's called a Schwarzbier because it's a black beer from Germany. It's a German word. It's not Yiddish, it's German, Schwarzbier. The evolution of beer. There's been a huge amount of things that have happened in beer, especially in our country over the last few years. All you young people know a lot about it because that's the beverage that you prefer to drink more than anything else, more than wine. And but about a third of people in America drink beer.